Hi there, this is Dr. Anna Maria Helt here with Basmati.com. I'm an herbalist and a microbiologist, and this week we're going to geek out on garden sage. And I find it hard to believe that I haven't actually gotten around to talking about sage yet. So here we go. This is common garden sage. Salvia officinalis is the botanical name. And when you hear the word officinalis, it means that that was the species of that plant that was used or is used as medicine. Salvia means savior, and it's no accident that this plant was named as such because it's been used for everything in terms of health, in terms of its traditional use. So a very useful herb. Now, many of you are familiar with sage from its kitchen uses, and my favorite use there is actually sage and brown butter sauce. So lots of great uses on the culinary side of things, but also an amazing plant to have in the medicine cabinet. One of the common things I use sage for is for cold and flu. And so like other members of the mint family, sage is pretty strongly antiviral. And so most respiratory infections are in fact viral. And so sage can be useful for that. Sage also has antibacterial principles in it, which can be useful for secondary infections. So while respiratory infections often or usually start out viral, sometimes you can develop a bacterial secondary infection. So you can do a little preventative work with sage there. Also a wonderful herb for the digestive tract, whether you've eaten something that may be a little off or if you're feeling a little bit gassy. Sage is what's known as a carminative herb. This is an aromatic herb that helps with proper peristalsis, proper intestinal movements to move that gas on so you're not bloated and feeling uncomfortable. Sage, moving on to yet another body system where it's helpful, the brain. Sage is wonderful for the nervous system. It can be useful for stress, especially menopause-related stress. It's useful for memory, and there's some research showing an effect on the new synapse formation, a new connection formation in the brain. So it's a really great tonic herb, especially as part of a blend to help keep the old noggin functioning properly. And I have recently started myself on some brain herbs like sage and ginkgo and some others just to try to keep things going. Sage is great when it comes to fluid regulation. So when there's excess fluid production going on, for instance, you could use sage as an antiperspirant, so it will reduce sweating. If you're breastfeeding and you want to start weaning or you're making way too much milk, you can use sage to slow that down. Now, the flavor of sage also helps with weaning because when it comes through the breast milk, it doesn't necessarily taste spectacular, but it also has effects on milk production itself and can be useful, like I said, when it's time to start weaning your little one off and onto the bottle and to other foods and such. And then bringing back menopause and perimenopause related stuff again, sage can be great for hot flashes, and sometimes sage by itself is enough, and so you can make a cup of sage and sip from it a few times a day or sip it throughout the day. Now be careful because sage can be really drying. It can dry up other fluids as well, and you don't want to over dry yourself, but sage can be great for hot flashes. Sometimes I'll even use it as part of a larger formula so that a client is not getting too much sage. It's being blended with some other herbs that may have moistening effects, something like shatavari, so you can balance out that dryness, which you may already be dealing with some dryness issues with menopause, and we don't want to exacerbate that. But that said, it can be a great ally for hot flashes. Sage can be great to help cool off an overactive thyroid. Now, of course, if you have rampant hyperthyroidism, you want to see your doctor because that can be really dangerous. But when things are maybe in the normal range but getting a little bit at the high end, you can use sage for that as well. Also a great antimicrobial herb and astringent herb for skin conditions. And so you can use it as a wash or maybe as a poultice of the mashed up leaves on things like mosquito bites or tick bites if you don't want them to get infected, on rashes and things like that, to help with any weepiness with those nasty kind of rashes. So I'm thinking things along the line of poison oak or poison ivy, those fun things. and burns and things like that, again, as a wash. And so keep it in mind. Useful internally, useful topically, useful in the kitchen. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of the many uses for sage. It's very strongly antioxidant, for instance. And this brings me on a little bit of a tangent. A lot of those so-called spaghetti spices, so your sage and rosemary, thyme, oregano, they're all really strongly antioxidant. And so one of their, and strongly antimicrobial. So one of their traditional uses was as a food preservative. And this may be how they wound up kind of evolving into being used as a spice for flavor, because they do taste good. But they actually, depending on their level in the food, were used to help preserve that food, to help suppress microbial growth, to help suppress oxidation of that food. And so a lot of our spices were used not just because they taste good, but they were also used for this food preservation aspect. And so that is sage, really easy to grow. Even in places where I live, high up in the Rocky Mountains, sage will overwinter. And so if you don't have a garden, put it on your balcony like I do. If you don't have a balcony, put it on your windowsill. But it's a really great plant to have around and in your life. And so until next time, be well.